Okay. Hello. Welcome to our virtual lunch hour. I'm Jillian Graber, Executive Director of Protect PT, and we're really so happy to have some guests with us today. We have our environmental scientist, Kathleen Brosseau. Say hi, Kathleen.
Hey, everyone.
And we also have Dr. David Brown, the public health toxicologist for the Environmental Health Project. So Southwest PA Environmental Health Project. Say hello, David.
Hello, everyone. How are you?
So thank you guys so much for tuning in today, and thank you to David and Kathleen for sharing their time with us today. We are going to be talking about environmental monitoring and around shale gas today. So we have a lot of great information to share with you. We want to get started right away because we have so much to do, and so we have a little bit more of a slideshow presentation for you guys, and then of course, if you have questions, we can actually answer your questions live. So if you go to our YouTube, if you're seeing this on Facebook, hop on over to the link on YouTube that Allison, the Executive Director of EHP, is going to share on their Facebook, and Mary, our Outreach Coordinator, is sharing on our Facebook. And please tune in with us on YouTube and ask those questions live, because we're going to be going over a lot of great information, and we want to make sure you have a chance to have some of your questions answered. So we're going to start off with David, and he's going to tell us a little bit about how the Environmental Health Project developed their air monitoring program. So, hi, David. How are you?
I'm really good and pleased to be here.
Great. Yeah. So, tell us a little bit about how that got started.
Okay, a little background. Really, there's 5 points, and I'll just quickly. Their question is why monitor it at all? How to meaningfully monitor? Why we monitor the way we do? And what issues are addressed when we report to you? And what should you do based on the monitoring? So let's get started. First of all, why monitor at all? Well, the reason that you monitor is because chemicals are getting into the air and at the source, which would be the wells, and getting to people's houses. So we monitor at people's houses because we want to know what the chemicals are getting there and how much. It's usually a mixture. So we monitor one of the components of the mixture, PM 2.5. And if you jump down one slide, and we use the instrument that's on the right in the middle, called a purple air monitor, developed by people in University of Utah. It's about the size of a softball, a little larger than a softball, and it feels about the same weight as a softball. What you do is you hang it on a post near your house, and it begins to record the levels of PM 2.5 every minute, and it will record forever and send that data to you. So you actually can see what the data looks like over time. Now that's really important, because if you go to the next slide, I think. Yeah. So if you look at the 15-minute concentration slide up on the right hand or the left hand corner, you'll see that generally when you think of monitoring, you think of like the speedometer of your car. I'm driving 50 miles an hour. I'm not driving 80 and 20. But when you monitor around gas sites, this is what you see. You see peaks of exposure that last for 30 to 60 minutes, and they appear from time to time. That graph shows you about a month of data around a site in New York that we're going to use to talk about. The reason that you monitor is you want to know when those peaks of exposure are occurring and what is causing them to occur near your house. Now, you got to be careful with the term monitoring, because EPA will say, we monitor also. What they do is monitor for 6 days, for 24 hours every 6 days, and their curve is down on the lower right-hand side, which you can see you get absolutely no information at all out of. So we were very concerned because people were telling us they had episodic exposures, tearing of the eyes, and respiratory problems and headaches, and they came and they went. And that didn't make sense. And so we became very curious about this curve in the upper left-hand side, and we wondered what sort of information was in that type of a curve. And that is the kind of information that's coming off the purple air monitor. We average it every 15 minutes because every minute for 30 days is a lot of information. So if we go to the next slide. Can you drop down one? This is what, if you look at the data over a period of time, that's basically what you're seeing on the monitor. And the green line is the line that says that's EPA's number. And we look at it and we say, what does that really mean? We did that for a while at EHP, and we realized that there was a lot more information in that data than we thought. So drop down a slide. Drop down another slide. Drop down one more. Okay. What happens when you monitor the data, maybe you should go back 2 slides for me quickly. Okay. What we do in your monitor, we decided that you could take the data from the monitors and determine the frequency that those high peaks occurred. That's shown in the upper left-hand thing. We found that the duration that the frequency lasted when it occurred was going to determine how much exposure the person was going to get in the middle of the night or whenever it would be. The time between frequencies basically told us how often did that occur. Did it occur every hour or every 3 or 4 hours? And then there was always something called the baseline. How much was the background exposure that people were looking for? All 4 and another pieces of information are actually in that curve that we just showed you. You just have to do a little bit of playing with it to see what it does. Go to the next slide, please. Okay, this just is showing us that you could, if you wanted, look at the total accumulative dose of particles, and actually that's a dose, and that's the little gray white blue pieces apart on top over baseline. Now go to the next slide. Okay, why monitor a lot of different places? This is a site in New York. Each house is at a specific location. Each color represents a house. And the top curve shows the number of peaks per day. When you look at the top curve with number of peaks per day, you'd say the deep yellow house looks like it's in pretty good shape because to the left is good, to the right is bad. And the green house, the purple house, is just about at the average value that we see when we look at we've looked at over 200 different houses monitoring this way. That's about what the average value looks like in places where they are drilling for gas. So it's not the average value in the middle of Westport, Connecticut, where I live, but that's what it is in those places. But the one to the left, the green and the sort of light yellow house, looks like they're having a few more peaks per day than we would have expected. If you go down one graph, I'm missing there's a slide over there I can't see because people are on there, but you can see that most houses have the same peak duration, 26 minutes. But I believe, although I can't see it, I think there's one on the right that shows high values. Now, if you go down one more graph, you'll see that the blue house is now high. It's getting the time between peaks, and now that curve's going the other way. So that is bad, still bad. It means it's getting its low peaks, but it gets them very frequently. Go down to the next slide, next piece. You'll see, no, not the next slide, there, the next line, and you'll see that yellow house, which looks so good up on the top curve, high value, is now if you go down carrying a very, very high graph, you'll see that the blue house and now is now down to the bottom peak, which getting the time between peaks, and now that curve's going the other way. There. So that is bad, still bad. It means it's getting its low peaks, but it gets them very frequently. Those people are going down to the next slide. Exposures. Next piece. So the data that we get not the next allows us to look at a neighborhood. You'll see that yellow house, a neighborhood which looks so good up on the first houses are different high values. Is now places around the site. So there's some are close, some are far. But if you can get enough people monitoring, you can actually get a sense of what is going on in that community. It's getting its low peaks, but it gets them. That means those people go down to the next slide. Exposure. Next piece. So the data that we get the next allows us to look at a neighborhood. You'll see this yellow house, a neighborhood, which looks so good up on the first house is now places around one site. So there's I can hear myself. Some are far, but if you can get enough people monitoring, you can actually get a sense of what is going on in that community. It's getting at low peaks, but again,
yeah, I'm not sure what's going on. I'm sorry.
Exposure. Next piece. So the data that we get the
very
next
strange
there
here.
to look next line, you'll see this yellow house, a neighborhood. Looks so good up on the first house. Is now places around one.
I think you know what? I think we should sign out and log back in.
Okay. Enough people monitoring, you can actually get a sense of what is going on in that community. Getting at low peaks, but again.
Give me 1 second.
Who's LUD?
I don't know. Oh,
That's where the sound is coming from.
LUD. I don't know. Well, it's better now.
It's gone. I don't know where it went.
That's weird. Okay. Well, I didn't stop sharing, so I apologize everyone for that technical glitch. I'm not really sure what happened. But
there's a little bit of a delay between the Zoom and the YouTube feed. So if somebody had the YouTube feed open while also having the Zoom open, that might have been where that feedback was coming from.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. Thank you so much, Allison. Yeah, that's weird. I am so sorry, everyone. I'm not really sure. We've never experienced that before, but I think we're gonna move on because I think it's fixed now. Whatever was going on, and I'm so sorry, David.
It's quite fine. You want me to? I'll give you a brief summary.
Sure.
Okay. So what I just explained to you is that we need to monitor something. So we monitor something called PM 2.5. It's a surrogate for all of the chemicals that are in the mixture. That the monitors have to be continuous for a period of about 30 days because you want to get each weather cycle as it goes through. So you can categorize the houses, and you can categorize the houses with different kinds of risks depending on how their particular risks are and where they are. So that's what we use at EHP to find out what the risks are. If I can have just a minute, and the reason we do that is we're trying to figure out what we can tell people to do who are exposed to protect themselves. So since only certain times of day are you getting effects, we can say, if you look at your air outside, we can explain how to do that, then you would select the times that you're going to do high activity outside because you'll get bigger doses. Unfortunately, the largest doses appear to occur in the middle of the night, which means that you may want to put a filter in your house to deal with that. But you can, when you get enough monitoring done, and you don't need a lot, 8 or 9 houses is fine. The more you get, the better. You can actually understand what the risks are. With this data, you can go to your community and say, hey, EPA is wrong. We really are having a hazard, and there's a problem from that exposure. I think that's all I had. Is there another slide? Yeah, we can identify, I'm not gonna talk about this at all to speak of, other than to show that if we wanted to show which direction the pollution is coming from, we have something we call a polar plot, which off of your monitoring data, we can show which direction the exposures are coming from and what wind speeds they might be. In this case, your monitor is right at the center. So why monitor? One of the reasons is you have to know what potentially is happening at your house, what kinds of chemicals are coming there. And can you do it reasonably? The answer is yes. Can it be interpreted so you can understand it? If you understood what I just said, the answer to that is yes, too. And I could go on forever, but I think if there are questions, I'll answer them. If you have to move on, that's fine, too.
Great. Yeah. And you know what? We'll let people ask questions, even if they don't have questions now. If we move along and you think of things that we didn't cover, please let us know. But I think that David, you highlighted a really important thing, that if you know that there is pollution, you can then either take action and take it to your local government, or, perhaps you want to change the way you're doing things in your home. Maybe you want to put in an air filter, air filtration in your home. Maybe you want to do other things. If it's a day that there's a lot of pollution outside, maybe, avoiding going outside to that, trying to avoid that exposure. So what we try to do is we with EHP, you guys have developed some wonderful tools to inform people about how to do that, and then we try to do the same thing, a lot of times using your tools that you guys have developed, and then also we have some of our own tools as well that we can really just talk to people about how to monitor, why we monitor, and then what to do with that information, because as everyone sometimes says, that information is power, and so that's kind of how we feel, that if we have the information, then we can have the power to either make decisions to better our lives, or to make decisions to talk to those who can do that for us, hopefully. So
these values can be online right now. I mean, you could actually go online and see what your value is right now if you want to.
yeah, and actually, so Purple Air has a couple different versions, and so when we started working on air monitoring a couple years ago with EHP, and at first we used the spec monitors, and now we're using these Purple Air monitors. And the cool thing about the ones that we're using that are kind of stationary, we call them stationary monitors, where they don't move around. So when we do monitoring at people's houses, we have a monitor that has an SD card, so it'll get the information, gather the information, and then we send it to you guys, and you guys have a great report that you send to us and the homeowner about what was in the air. But then there's also the type of Purple Air that you can just put it on your house or outside somewhere, where you can just attach it to a Wi-Fi, and then it'll show you in real time. And the neat thing is, you can see, if you go to the Purple Air website, you can see the different monitors that are out there, and approximately where they're located, and what the air quality is in that area, which is really neat. And actually, at the end of last year, we did a fundraising campaign to try to get some stationary monitors for our community, and we were able to get enough money, I think, for 3 monitors. So we're going to be working with our interns this summer to get those monitors up and running, and we're going to be using things like the wind patterns to assess where we should actually put those monitors in. So yeah, and Mary, thank you so much for popping up the Purple Air website. It's popped up here on the screen. So if you want to take a look at the Purple Air website, you can. And then I think from a wider perspective, what is the purpose of collecting this data from a wider perspective? So are there other people that could use this data, or is this for the homeowner? Do you want to ask?
It's for both. It's primarily for the homeowner, but it's for other people. If we can get enough data, we can actually, in the permitting process, go and say, no, this site cannot be within 500 feet of somebody's house, because they will get exposures that look like this. Mm-hmm. And we can prove it because we've got 200 sites that show that's what happens. And so we can force them to either control their emissions, or to not put sites right next to people's houses, mm-hmm. and schools and other places.
Lois had a great question. She says, are there ideal conditions, wind speed, for instance, to monitor?
Well, we monitor all the time. But the answer to Lois's question is, if you were going to try and take a Suma canister and get the best picture of the exposure, the answer to that is yes. the wind is
Lily,
very
you have to
slow.
be quiet. I'm live
It's
on
usually
YouTube.
around
Okay,
dawn.
get upstairs now.
When there's very little mixing,
Put it down and
so
get
you can
upstairs.
identify all the chemicals that are present there. The very times when you don't want to go out and play is a time when you want to take what we would call a grab sample.
Yeah, great. That was a really good question. Thank you so much, Lois. And so, you know, we've been partnering with EHP for several years, really since we began 5 years ago. We started gathering resources, and they were a tremendous help with when we started our group of citizens that now is a nonprofit. And I think the great thing is that we can, you know, one of the things that we found out early on is we need to monitor the air. We need to get that baseline. So we've been able to do that because of the relationship that we have with the Environmental Health Project. So we're really thankful that we can do that for our community, and that we can work together, because I think that us having the monitors ourselves and being able to have the equipment ourselves is great, because then we can deploy them in our community, send you guys the data, and we're really splitting the work. You know, we're splitting the workload, which, you know, anybody that works in this field knows that you always have more work than you have time for. So somebody said that they got kicked off. I'm so sorry you got kicked off. That's disappointed, but it will be recorded. It's going to be on YouTube. So I'm really sorry that happened. Thanks so much for tuning back in with us. I'm really happy you're here. So if you have questions as we're going on, please let us know. We want to hear your questions, and we want to really just make people aware that this monitoring is happening. Kathleen, do we have any monitors deployed right now, or are we waiting, you know, for circumstances to change? What's the status right now?
Right now, our monitors are not deployed. We took a break for the COVID-19 for the isolation. We're working on our isolation plan for the summer, and we're hoping to get monitors back out in mid-June.
Great. So, you know, I know that EHP, you guys are in Washington County, and you do a lot of monitoring elsewhere as well. And then we also have monitors of our own in Westmoreland County. We have monitored. Is it just Westmoreland County we've monitored so far, Kathleen?
We've monitored. Is Elizabeth Township in Westmoreland County?
No, it's in Allegheny.
Okay. So we've monitored it a little bit in Allegheny as well, then a fair bit.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah. So these are sites that came up that we knew were going to be developed. So because we knew ahead of time, we could monitor and get some baseline, and then go back during construction and during the drilling and fracking phases. And what's really interesting is that Kathleen was also able to gather noise information. So our noise monitoring program is one of the only ones that we know of actually in the United States, and certainly in our region. We're working with a lot of different development types of infrastructure for shale gas, but really what we focused on in the past is getting some of the baseline data around our neighborhoods, and then also we've done some stuff in other communities as well. So Kathleen, do you want to kick it off and kind of talk about the noise monitoring program?
Absolutely. So I've been with Protect PT for about 1.5 years now, but the noise study program started in 2017. So it's a great program. We're mostly working on baseline data. We did have some wells that were constructed, and we were able to get a full assemblage of data, which was really great. I obviously would prefer that the wells were never constructed, because these people were facing some impacts, but those impacts now have been documented, which, if anyone's familiar with science, if you don't write it down, it didn't happen, essentially. So you want to get the data, because otherwise you don't have anything to show. So you can see here, we have a lovely picture of a shepherd's hook with a bird feeder on it. And what you might not be able to tell is that inside of that bird feeder, there is a noise monitor. with a range from 40 decibels to 120 decibels. So it's very unobtrusive for us to go put this in your yard. We do 2 back-to-back 72-hour studies. And if we could look at the next slide. And here you can see us setting it up, or actually you can see the size of the noise monitor that goes in there. And it just has a couple of AA batteries in it. It runs for 3 days. We do not at this time record sound. So we wouldn't be recording voices or anything like that. We are only recording decibel levels. And that's 72 hours is the industry standard to get a good view of what's going on. And we do 2 back-to-back studies usually, unless there are other things influencing what we're doing, so that we get the full variation of the week. We want to get some weekday samples and we want to get some weekend samples. So we can move on to the next slide. There we go. And so decibels are on a logarithmic scale, which means they go up really quickly, much more quickly than you would think. So we have some examples here of different decibel levels and the EPA night and the EPA day guidance. So part of why we do these studies is because there is EPA guidance. However, noise is considered a nuisance and is often monitored at the township level. So we try to look at the EPA night and the EPA day data and compare our data to that to see if these sites are impacting residents by going over these baselines that the EPA has determined to be non-intrusive. So when you're sleeping, you wouldn't want anything over 45 decibels. And it looks like that got moved a little bit when we switched this over to this slide. So EPA night is actually 45 and EPA day is 55, and it's showing it at around 80 and 100. So that's a slide error. But around 45, it has 50 around moderate rainfall. And you can see if you go up to 80, that's a screaming baby. So if you have something at 80 decibels, that's quite disruptive. And we'll go to our next slide. So an interesting thing that we found was something that is called a noise signature. So this is the typical output from our detection management software, where you can see we have 2.5 days of data around, and you can see the EPA nighttime baseline at the bottom there at 45, and then the daytime baseline at 55. And this looks fairly random. You stay around 40, 45 most of the time, with a couple of peaks during high activity times. And if we go to the next slide, this was an accidental study. We weren't anticipating, but it gave us some great data. So this was a baseline study done last summer during the cicada spawn, where basically the trees are screaming. But this particular person wasn't bothered by this noise, because you can see it's a gradual increase and a gradual decrease, and it's a very natural sort of wave of noise. So even though this noise is higher than typically you would expect, this person was comfortable with it, which brings us to how different types of noise can affect you. So if you live in the country and you hear birds, you expect birds, and the birds typically aren't bothersome to people. Whereas if we go to the next slide, this is showing some fracking, and you can see these square plateaus. So the square plateaus is a signature of when they were fracking. And this is also part of how we can look and see what's going on, is even though we're only looking at the noise volume, it has a very distinct appearance on the graph. And this was also reported by the resident who was having this study done. So you can see how they went from fracking to production. production has much less activity, it's much more similar to a baseline. There's still activity on the site, but it's not as distinctive as the fracking. So while the noise from the fracking might not be as high as the cicadas, it's more disruptive because it is a grinding, abrupt industrial noise. So that was part of what we found about our study, is that it's not necessarily the volume that is having the most impact. Sometimes it is the type of noise.
And Kathleen, before you go on, I have a great question from Allison. She asks, since you're only measuring decibels, is there any way to differentiate between quiet sounds nearby, birds and cicadas, and loud noises far away, industrial sources? So I think you touched on that a little bit in what you were saying, but do you have anything to add?
Well, this is why it's so important to get baseline data. Because if we get the baseline data, sometimes we do have high periods. Like some of the loudest sounds we've had so far were children swimming in a pool. But since the resident who was having the study conducted logged down, it's like, oh, there are children swimming at the pool this time, we can differentiate that. So we do rely a bit on people actively taking notes during these studies. And the more notes they take, the more it helps us.
Well, and I think that brings up a really good point, Kathleen, that we rely on the participation of the person doing the study, conducting the study. So if there is equipment at your house, whether it's an air monitor or whether it's a noise monitor, writing down these observations is key, because there's no way for us to know, let's say you have a monitor inside and outside of your home, and all of a sudden your air monitor, let's say it's an air monitor, and it spikes, but you're cooking. Cooking actually can make those monitors spike for PMs, especially if you don't have proper ventilation. So that's something that we try to tell people too. These are other things that could happen in your home that would make this monitor spike. And so for us knowing that, someone's cooking, or you would be surprised, dusting your house or vacuuming your house can really make a spike in those air monitors as well. So writing those activities down is essential. And actually, when I was testifying in Murraysville with the data that we had done in another township, we were talking about how our equipment is different from the industry's equipment, because there are, industry noise experts that will take these samples. And they were looking at the pure data. So they were saying, well, the ambient noise in the community is around 58 decibels. And really, we heard a lot of birds and cicadas, right? So your noise ordinance is actually, lower than that. So really, birds and cicadas are violating your noise ordinance. But what we tried to say is, well, there's a distinction, because people are going to be bothered by, more bothered by an activity that they normally wouldn't have in their backyard versus something that they normally would have in their backyard, which are birds and cicadas. Like, we know there are times of years when, we can expect for those things to happen. In fact, we camped outside last weekend, and my daughter and my husband camped outside, and I can't do it because at 5 o'clock, those birds are up chirping, and I don't want to get up at 5 o'clock if I don't have to. So I was inside where it was nice and warm. So that's something that we need to kind of think about, and how it impacts our quality of life, which I think goes to kind of the purpose of why we do this in the first place, that this type of noise impacts our quality of life. So do you have anything to say about that, Kathleen, or anything to add?
It absolutely impacts quality of life. And really, I cannot overstate the importance of our members and our member participation and how they say this, because when you are presenting the raw data to somebody, it may not necessarily have an impact, but when you're presenting the raw data and corroborate that with a statement from a resident saying that they were woken up in the middle of the night, that has some impact. That's And that's the sort of qualitative statements that really make our data more meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
So it's much appreciated, all the participation we've had. And so moving on to the next slide, if that's okay. So the previous slides of the noise signatures were sort of the raw data that we get from when we download from the noise meter. This is more of a chart that we would make to show the difference in what's happening. And this is one example of a site where you can see during the daytime, we have winter construction is noisier than the nighttime. And then you start in spring with drilling, and you can see that drilling is consistently noisier during the daytime than is recommended. And just because it's not defined on here, LEQ is just the level equivalency of the decibels. So LEQ is just sort of another way to say decibels. So the decibels for the day and the night averages. And during summer fracking, you can see suddenly now at nighttime, you're well above the recommended nighttime level of 45 decibels. And that's because that's a 24-hour 7 activity. When they are fracking, you can't stop that just because of how the process is. And then this particular site was near the entryway to a well pad. So we did a separate study in the summer of how the traffic might be impacting them. And the truck noise was quite disruptive. So you're not just looking at the construction, you're not just looking at the fracking, there's also the infrastructure around the unconventional natural gas development, in this case, the truck traffic. There's also compressor stations, there are pipelines, there's a lot of pumping stations, pigging stations. There's some infrastructure that goes along with this, and that can also have an impact. So that is also something, if we have the opportunity to monitor, we like to get out there and look at. Next slide. And this, I'm going to refer this back to you, Jillian, unless we have some questions about the noise monitoring, other than everyone should sign up for noise monitoring, please.
Yeah, and I think we lost David. David, are you still there, or did you hop off? I'm not sure if he's still there.
I am still here.
Oh, great. Okay. So, Kathleen brought up a good point, and I wanted to see, sorry, my dog's back going crazy. I wanted to see if you had a comment about, different types of infrastructure and maybe what you see as far as air monitoring with different types of infrastructure and along the truck route as well.
Yeah, well, a lot of comments. We see compressor stations as major sources. And we actually find, I think Kathleen, you and I talked about it a day or two ago, we find that people who live near compressor stations can feel the vibration through the floor of their houses. And it's very, very disruptive to them. It was disruptive to me once the fellow explained that the floor was vibrating. I said, let's talk outside. But so that's what happens. But particularly with the truck traffic and such, they're releasing very, very large amounts of PM 2.5 from the diesel vehicles, which are which is dangerous. And in some cases, that is
you guys need to be a lot quieter,
because in some cities, Boston, for example, those trucks are required to have a filter on them so that they will not release those particles. City of Los Angeles requires the same thing. So there's some things that the industry actually could do. The filters are expensive, but our lives are also expensive. Does that answer your question?
It does. And actually, you made me think about something. And I believe the Environmental Health Project helped us when we were preparing for what's called a 3251 conference. So if you're a person that lives near a well site, when it's when it's in the permitting stage, you can actually go and request a conference with the DEP and request a conference with the operator. And so we did this on a couple occasions where we requested a conference, and it's in Chapter 3251 of the Oil and Gas Act. So if you want to look that up later, you can. And if you have questions about it, let us know. But we requested a conference, and we went, and one of the things that we asked for were those types of mitigation systems that they can put on the trucks, because we knew that truck traffic and the air emissions from truck traffic were especially harmful to the people, not just at the site, but also on the way to the site. And just to kind of give you guys an idea, and I would have to look back at my notes for the particular well pad. Maybe you remember, Kathleen, but there are hundreds of trucks that go from a well site. So when you have a local hearing, normally what will happen is the operator will have to tell the community how many trucks go to and from the site. And so when we were in Murraysville for the Titan well pad, that was a question that was asked. Well, how many trucks are going to go to and from the site? And there's lots of different types of trucks, but all of these are large diesel trucks for the most part. There are also things that they could do, like they could have electric fleets, which is something that they said, we can look into having an electric fleet because that's not going to have the emissions that a diesel truck has. But again, that's not something that is, economically going to be something that they're going to want to do. So really, it's up to citizens to push for these types of measures that could mitigate the emissions.
You can also require that the trucks not be allowed to idle more than 3 minutes.
Yeah, that's a really good one.
Because there's a lot of idling trucks around those sites.
Yeah, and sometimes the trucks have been staged on roads. So you can also ask them for them to not be staged on local roads, which doesn't really do anything for if they're going to be idling and waiting. On the access road, it actually just contains, or doesn't contain, but it has the source of the air pollution on the access road instead of on the road next to your house. But living across the street from one of these sites, just from us, actually going to a site and parking in the driveway of a home and going up to install a monitor, I was just thinking to myself, I don't know if I could live here for that amount of time that was happening. We do have a couple really good questions. We have one that is, this might be more of an ordinance question, but do municipalities, it just went up. Do municipalities have different requirements for day and night? And the short answer is yes, that some municipalities do have requirements for day and night. And in fact, in the example of the Murraysville well pad, there were specifics for day and nights in their ordinance. Sometimes they don't indicate that, or sometimes they don't have an ordinance for noise. So in Penn Township, our ordinance for noise for industrial activity is quite high. It's 90 decibels for more than, I forget what time frame, but that's quite high. And that's for an industrial operation or and we have a specific industrial zone, and this kind of goes to a whole new conversation. But if you're talking about industrial operations that are outside of industrial zones for the most part, so the question becomes, what applies to them? You would think that in a residential zone, the residential noise ordinance would apply, and not the industrial noise ordinance, even though this is an industrial source of noise. So that's something to consider and something to advocate for in your local community. And if folks want to do that, there's some wonderful people out there working on ordinances. Food and Water Watch works a lot with ordinances, the Environmental Integrity Project. So there's a lot of great people out there. We can connect you with folks if you're interested in that. We have also a memo, and we can share some of the de-identified data with you. So we do the studies at people's homes, but we're not sharing that information with anybody but the homeowner, unless the homeowner gives us the go ahead to do so. But we will de-identify it. So we'll say, in Penn Township at, this date near this well site, this is what happened. So just to know that. The other question we have, I think, David, you're going to be better to answer this. Are vehicle emissions VOCs? Is the question we have.
Are vehicle emissions VOCs? I think.
Yes, that's the question.
VOCs are from some vehicle emissions are VOCs. Some are particulates, but there are VOCs that come from vehicles. Yeah, benzene would be one of them. Benzene is a class of VOCs, so they would be released from there.
Yeah. And actually, we've got another question from Lois. She says, Monroeville already has an ordinance. Vehicle's not idle for more than 5 minutes. So you may want to check your local ordinances. Oh, okay. That's more of a statement, less of a question. Thank you, Lois. Yeah, I think that just checking those local ordinances is really important. It's something that we talk about in our home resource guide, which we used to have workshops for, but we're thinking about doing that virtually because obviously, with COVID-19 happening, we're not going to be looking at workshops anytime soon. So, but if you want resources on this, we can certainly share those resources with you. In the meantime, we have on our webpage Fracking in Your Neighborhood. And that's an important resource. But I also want to mention too, we've gotten a lot of calls, and actually the Environmental Health Project received some calls and they forwarded them to us because they were based on noise. And that's something that we look at. And so this one call in particular was something very similar to what you described, David, with kind of the vibration of a compressor station. But the resident was really impacted more because they were home more during COVID-19. Yeah. We're homebound more now than we have been before. So, we wanted to know, we thought, well, okay, is that the only time that that's happened? Are there people being impacted more because, from these shale gas developments because they're home? Is this something that they're being impacted more from? So we made a survey. And if you'd like to take the survey, if you live near some type of oil and gas infrastructure and are impacted by it, please take our survey. And we have the link up here on the screen. It's just a bit.ly shale COVID. And, take the survey because we want to know how you're feeling. I think that this is an area that needs to be researched and needs to be looked at. Because, we're going to look back at this time, most likely and think, well, what could we have done differently? And I think that looking at the fact that people are being impacted, it's one thing to be impacted for the hours that you're home. If you're away from the house working, it's another thing if you're working from home, you're being at home with your family and you're being there all the time, every day, 24/7. So that's something to think about. And if you want to take our survey, we'd love to have your input. It's really important to us, and these are important ways that we can advocate for the community. Also, if you're interested, you can check out the Environmental Integrity Project. And Mary, would you mind putting the Environmental Health Project's website up here as well? Because the Environmental Health Project has many great resources on it. One of the ones that I was thinking, as David, as you were talking, is the health assessment. The health impact assessment. Will you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, that's a methodology that's accepted when industry goes anywhere. When you develop anything, you often need a health impact assessment. It's a structured document. You have to ask questions about what is the population, what are the potential health risks for the population, what is the health status of the population, what will the exposures be, and it's in a systematic structure. You show how these exposures will impact on your particular community because you use your community data to put it together. So you have to work with your community together to get that done. And we have a checklist for what are the specific questions that are needed to do a health impact assessment. People come back to us and say, that checklist was fantastic in the meeting because we just got up and asked the question from the checklist and nobody could answer it, which is bad in one sense, but it also tells you how poorly the human health aspects of what is being done are being evaluated. And I think we were talking about impacts on people. I think it's important to realize people are getting sick. This is not some theoretical document. People are ill from this. They're functioning less well. We have data that shows that from our work that we've done. So this is not not in my backyard argument. It is people have a right to health, and nobody has a right to take that away from them. And that, in a sense, is, in my personal opinion, what is happening with the fracking.
Yeah. So
I'll get off my soapbox.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And I think that that's why we do the work that we do, because, we know that people are being impacted. And when we first started Protect PT, one of the things that we sought out and something that the Environmental Health Project started us or helped us with was trying to tell our local officials how people are being impacted in hopes that their decision making would be influenced by what the outcomes to the people would be and not influenced by what the how much money the industry would give them, or influenced by how much they would be sued for if they were not to allow it. And early on, we had 3 well pads that were denied because of our participation at the public hearing, because of bringing this evidence forward. And then the industry went around and sued our township for $380 million. And that was a big blow to us, because we knew that the reason why they denied the well pads in the first place was a sound reasoning. It was based upon the research that we presented. It was based upon the evidence we presented. It was based upon the risk assessment that we presented. And it was really important to us as residents to get, to have the relief and have the neighborhood be and feel like we intended it to be and feel when we bought our homes, Right. And so that's a really important aspect. A lot of us buy a home and we expect that in 10 years from now, we are going to be living in a relatively same neighborhood that we live today. I think that that's an important thing to consider, and why we do what we do. It's not a conversation about should it happen or should it not happen. It's not a conversation of not in my backyard. It's a conversation of, these are impacts to human health, and are we going to allow people to get sick or not?
One of the reasons to collect data is because we will have the data. The day will come and we will have the data.
Yeah. Well, and we have another comment. Can you get a good cross-section of the community if the participants are voluntary? That's a good question. That was the criticism from a couple of the doctors that attended an EHP that C1 had. So this is communities first with me.
Right.
So I'll let you answer that first, David, and then I have my own take on that.
Okay. Well, these are scientific monitors. They measure what's in the air. They measure, when in the case of water, they measure what's in the water. That's what's there. Mm-hmm. You can't change it. Whether you are for drilling or not drilling, it is going to be what is in the air. So you can, the question is, do you get enough locations where you're looking at it? It doesn't, the motivation of the person to put the monitor there has nothing to do with how valid that monitor is.
Yeah, and I also think it has nothing to do whether they're pro or against oil and gas. I think that it has to do with people monitor because they want to be sure that their family is not going to have impacts, and if they have that data, then they can have that kind of peace of mind. And I think that that's kind of what happens with our noise monitoring. I think it gives people a little bit of peace of mind that this is being tracked and that somebody is listening to them, somebody is taking it seriously, and somebody's gathering that data so then they can go to their local official and tell them, hey, I was bothered by this, here is the evidence of that. And I think that's really important.
You can take the data to your doctor.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is not some game.
Yeah. And whether it's voluntary, I mean, I think that kind of brings up the question too, that, these are things that if you were to do a study and have involuntary participants, I think that would come into question. And I don't know how to, I don't know how to say that. I'm not a scientific person, but there's like a scientific principles behind this. Kathleen.
So we do, I'm going to interrupt you, Julie, just for a second. We do look at, when we're doing noise studies and when we're trying to gather air data for EHP, we do look at regional factors and where people are located, and we try to distribute that over the region. Mm-hmm. So it's not like the only criteria is volunteering or having a political agenda. It's a question of location, and we try to get a broad regional base for our data.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why we would really appreciate if people want to be involved in monitoring, that they do so. One of the things that we're developing here, and I'm just going to give you guys a little bit of a look at it. Well, not a look, because we don't have it actually made yet, but we're working on it really hard. And hopefully by the end of the summer, we'll have it done. We're doing an app. So this monitoring app will record and report your monitoring observations, whether you're doing a study with Protect PT or with the Environmental Health Project, or if you're not doing a study, but you're having impacts that you want to document, you can document those impacts with our app. And it'll ask you all kinds of questions about what you're experiencing, how you're experiencing them, and that can lead you to give us the data that we might need to help you. So then we can contact you. Let's say you're in our area, we'll contact you. Or if you're in, Washington County, we'll let EHP, because they have a constituency out there. We'll let them handle it, and we can work together to get you the help that you need. So it's really important that people start monitoring. And if you go to the next slide, we also want to, we had a discussion last week about amity and prosperity right in the backyard of EHP, in Washington County. And we're going to continue this conversation about fracking there. So we want to mention that again. And then also we want to mention, if you'll click to the next slide, we would not be able to do many of these noise studies and air studies if it weren't for our members, because our members are the ones that either give us access to their property, or give us the ability to actually do the monitoring through things like donations. And we're a nonprofit, so we can't do this work without our members. So right now, we actually have a membership drive going on where if you become a member of Protect PT, we're actually going to enter you to win one of these particular prizes that were donated by members. And also Patagonia, they donated this great bag for us. So I want to mention that too, and to make sure that people are looking at membership, because we can't do these studies without members. And it's really important that we have a community to help us and are behind us. We do have, I think, another question. Is radon generally higher in residents' homes near drilling sites or compressor stations? That's
Yes.
being asked right now. Go ahead, David.
They found that in northeast Pennsylvania. They found higher radon levels where fracking was going on.
Okay. And then I think I also have another one. I would imagine if litigation arises later, it would be important to have data for people who are willing to take action on or that are personally impacted. And Megan, I think you bring up a really good point. One of the things that we do when we give our reports to the members that participate in our studies, we give them a report. We also give them a nuisance memo. So let's say you want to pursue that litigation, you can do so. You have the data to be able to do it, and you have it documented how it's been done. I should mention also that our noise monitoring study, it was developed over several years. It was developed with the aid of an audiologist. So we took a lot of steps to make sure that these were as scientific as possible. And Kathleen, she has a great scientific background. And that's why, we're so happy that she's on our staff, that she can help our members. And I have another question before we get off. So it looks like Communities First says, we have a monitoring program now with CMU ramp in Swickley Valley. We are going to expand it. I sincerely hope that the groups will work together to show an overview of this Southwest PA area and larger. So thank you so much, Swickley, Communities First Swickley, for letting us know that. And then, Anne, if you'll go to the next slide. We're 1 minute over, but we want to tell you really quickly about this action alert. We actually, here in Westmoreland County, there was a sanitary landfill and Water Authority. I don't know if you remember in the Post-Gazette and State Impact reported on this last year, that they actually had a restraining order because they were discharging a huge amount of leachate, much more than they were supposed to be discharging in the water treatment facility. And they were finding materials in fracking waste in this water. And so we've had some water samples that a researcher did here at Duquesne, and we had this is something that we've been looking at for a while, but just recently in the Post-Gazette last week, it was reported that there's a new permit, an air permit for them to evaporate this liquid runoff waste. So liquid leachate, they want to evaporate it to be able to get rid of it, because they're not allowed to give it to the waste treatment facility anymore. So we want community members to call the DEP and number one, request an extension, because we would love for researchers like David Brown to be able to look at this, look at the permit and look at and tell us what some of those implications were. And with COVID-19 happening and all the stuff happening right now in our country, we have just been so inundated with comments to DEP and other things going on that we have not had the time to properly comment. So we want to, number one, ask for an extension for the comment period, which the deadline is actually next week, June 9th. So we want to get the extension. Number two, we want to get a public hearing, because this is going to make a big impact to the public around that facility, around that landfill. And this is a community that on three sides of surrounding area of the landfill is an environmental justice community. And so it's really important that we, that we make those comments, that we ask for a public hearing, and that we have, luckily wonderful resources like David Brown and like the EHP team to be able to look at some of this permit applications and try to give us things that we can talk about, and hopefully if we get a hearing, then someone could come and join us at the hearing and testify as to why this is such a terrible idea for the DEP to allow this to happen. So we want to make sure that people can have access to that. And so we want you to go online and take action. I have the bit.ly up here, June 9 DEP. So if you type that in, and Mary put it in the chat, so I hope the link is actually live in the chat. But we want you to take action on that. And if you go, is there another slide, Anne? And then it's important to subscribe to our YouTube, because then you'll know what's coming up next. So please do that. And thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you to the Environmental Health Project for the wonderful work you're doing and you know, being with us today. Thank you, Kathleen, for helping us bring our noise monitoring program, you know, up a next level. And thank you, David, for joining us. We're really happy that you could spend the lunch hour with us. And have a great day, guys, and enjoy the weekend. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week.
We appreciate it. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.